Well, resiliency, I always think of a picture that comes from Pat Deegan when she talked about resiliency. And Pat Deegan is a PhD psychologist who lives with schizophrenia and also lives in the recovery process. But she talks about the keel of a ship. And I wasn't even sure what the heck a keel of a ship is, but I'm sure people in the Maritimes are very familiar with all of that. So the keel is that ridge in the middle of the boat, underneath the boat, and its purpose is to keep the boat from completely capsizing. That's what I understand. So I think God gives us a God-built keel of resiliency that we're born with, that keeps us from capsizing in the tumultuous waves of life. Now, some people have developed their keel much stronger because I think there are things that can, corrupt or destroy our keel, like trauma in the family, poor self-esteem. So when we talk about resiliency, the capacity to bounce back, that's what resiliency is, the ability, the capacity to bounce back after life has thrown everything at you. So the real questions we ought to ask when we're talking about resiliency, rather than trying to get the most perfect definition, is what are the risks and the protective factors. So there's certain things that protect our resiliency and certain things that put us at greater risk. So risk would be trauma, a very toxic shame-based home, poor self-esteem, being bullied, no spiritual supports, etc., etc. So the protective factors would be a very loving home, good self-esteem, a healthy spirituality, factors like that.
Oh, there's a tremendous amount of stigma attached to mental illness, even today. I think for two reasons. One is there's still a real lack of understanding. Because the evidence is behavior changes, or mood changes, or thought pattern changes, and that's difficult to see. That's difficult to understand why that's happening. If I break my arm, we know immediately what's wrong, we know how to fix it. If I start acting very strangely, we may not understand what's happening at all. And so I think lack of understanding is one area. And I think the second thing is that it involves intangibles. It involves moods, it involves feelings, it involves perceptions. And those are intangibles. We can't see a lot of that on an X-ray. And I think for those probably two reasons at least, there's probably others, but for those two, then we stigmatize what we don't understand. We stigmatize what we have difficulty dealing with. So we stigmatize it, we alienate, we avoid. And I think that still exists very much today and manifests itself in a number of ways. Look how we label. We label mental illness, well, they're crazy, they're nuts, they're loony, they're dangerous. So we stereotype many times in very inaccurate ways. Now it's getting better. We don't treat them like we did back in the Middle Ages or anything like that. I think because probably there is a better understanding. I mean, we are making strides in understanding mental illness, and it's so common. The studies show that 1 in 5, 20% of our population will have an episode of some kind of mental illness in a given year. And it's the same for Canada, 20%. And that maybe, and 80% of us know somebody who's been diagnosed with a mental illness. So we know it's very common, and some of the studies suggest that maybe 1 in 3 will have some kind of a depression episode or an anxiety episode. So it is very common, and probably for those reasons, we are stigmatizing less and trying to understand more. And hopefully that will continue.
There's a church in northern New Brunswick who had a conference on depression. And they invited me to speak. And I took a client with me to tell her story. And they expected 50. They ended up, I think, with 250. And it said something. People want to learn about depression because everybody knows somebody who's depressed. So I think making it a priority in educating people is just as important as having a Bible teacher come in and do something on marriage or whatever. So I think another thing is kind of good too, choosing a topic and maybe doing a Sunday school class, like do a Sunday school class on anxiety, you know, or do a midweek study on mental health issues and deal with them, the different aspects, because anxiety and depression are like the common cold of mental health. You know, I mean, they're common. And now I think the church needs to be dealing with more grief, because everybody knows somebody who's dying of cancer. So let's have a grief seminar. How do we deal with grief? How do we help people get through the grief? How do you walk with a person who's dying of cancer? How do you get through that? There's just so many facets of it, actually. So I would say that's, and until you know someone who's been mentally ill, and a family or friend, there'll always be a certain amount of intolerance or misunderstanding. But when you know someone and love someone who's mentally ill, you have a different attitude.